The spire was screaming. White light tore itself out of the clouds in unbroken sheets. Not bolts, but sheets. The kind of discharge that scholars in the lower libraries had words for, and ordinary men did not. And at the top of that spire, in the eye of it, stood a man who should not have been alive. The guards at the wall base had their helmets off because the metal had grown too hot to wear. And every fine hair on every forearm in the courtyard lifted toward the sky as though hoping to be chosen. Savel did not lift his hands. He did not need to. The lightning came to him the way water comes to a low place, finding him out, threading him, leaving him. From below, he looked like a man standing inside a column of pure white sound. Up close, if anyone had been close enough to see, he looked like a man holding his breath against the inside of his own ribs. The storm peeled off the city in long, thinning arms and went back up into itself, and the spire dimmed, and somewhere in the lower town a child who had been crying stopped, because the air had stopped tasting like a coin held under the tongue. Savel came down the inner stair without a torch. He did not need one. His eyes still held enough afterglow to read by. He passed Captain Jackson at the second landing without seeing him, and Jackson did not speak, because there were nights when speaking to him was like speaking to a sword that had not yet decided whose hand it was in. 3 nights later, in a room without weather, the most dangerous man in the realm went silent in the middle of a sentence about grain. The War Council had been at it since the bell before dawn. Maps were curling at the corners from the heat of too many lamps. Lord Tyrion was halfway through an argument about border tariffs that no one was listening to. High Counselor Selene was tapping the rim of her cup with the edge of her ring in a way that meant she had already decided what would be done and was waiting for the men to catch up. At the far end of the table sat a girl who should not have been at the table at all. She was small and plainly dressed, with the burn-pale hands of a glass grinder and a smear of fine grit at her wrist that she had not noticed. She had been brought up from the workshop floor because the conductor lands needed explaining, and the master grinder was drunk, and the bursar had said, "Send the deaf one, she will not gossip." So Wen sat with her back too straight and her hands folded over the wrapped lens in her lap and watched mouths. She had been watching Savel's mouth in particular, because his was the only one that mattered. He had asked her, through a clerk who knew the hand signs poorly, about the tolerance of the silver veining in the new lens, and she had answered, and he had nodded once, and then he had begun to speak again to the council, and his mouth had been moving in the shape of the word seasonal, and then his mouth had stopped. She saw it before any of them. She saw the small slackening at the corner of his jaw, the half second when a face stops being held. She saw his eyes lose their focus on the middle distance and go somewhere underneath the middle distance. She saw his weight shift very slightly to his left, away from the arm of his chair, and she understood, in the bewildered animal way of a person who has read bodies all her life because she could not read voices, that he was going to fall. She did not have time to stand. She did not have time to push back her chair. He simply tipped, the whole long line of him, sideways and a little forward, and his temple came down on the woven wool of her skirt above her knee, and his shoulder followed. And then he was still. The room did not move. Wen could not hear what the room sounded like. She could see it. Lord Tyron's mouth was open around a word he had abandoned. Selene had risen halfway out of her seat and forgotten to finish rising. 2 of the betas behind the throne-side chairs had their hands on their hilts and had not drawn. A clerk had dropped his stylus and was watching it roll without reaching for it. 15 faces were turned to her, and not one of them was breathing in a useful way, and Savel's breath was going in and out against the cloth at her thigh, slow and even and impossibly deep, the breath of a man asleep, the breath of a man who had not slept. Wen did not move either. She could feel her own pulse in the soft place under her jaw. She could feel the weight of his head, which was heavier than she had expected, heavier than a head ought to be, as though something inside it had finally been set down. She could feel a fine prickling warmth where his temple pressed her leg, the kind of warmth a hand gives off after holding a cup of hot tea too long. And she could feel, half a heartbeat before her ears would have rung if her ears still rang, a stillness in the air around him, as though the room had taken one step back from a cliff it had not known it was on. Celine was the first to move. She lowered herself back into her chair very slowly, the way a person sits down in the presence of a sleeping animal that might be a wolf and might be a dog, and cannot yet be told which. No one spoke for a long time. Then Captain Jackson, who had been standing behind Savel's chair the entire session, lifted one hand in a small, flat gesture, palm down, and the betas in the room let go of their hilts, the way men do when they have been told not to move and do not yet know why. Wen looked at Jackson. Jackson looked at Wen. He had gray at his temples and a scar that ran from the corner of his mouth into his beard, and he was the only person in the room whose face was not afraid. His face was something else. His face was the face of a man who had been waiting 14 months for a thing to happen, and was watching it happen now, and had not yet decided whether to weep. He signed to her, badly, with stiff fingers. Do not move. She did not move. Outside, very far away, thunder rolled along the spine of the western hills, and inside, the most dangerous man in the realm slept against the leg of a girl who had come to talk about glass. And Celine, watching, set down her ring very carefully on the table so that it would not make a sound. The first thing Wen learned about him while he slept was that he did not twitch. She had grown up sharing a pallet with 3 cousins and an aunt, and people in sleep were restless things, twitching at flies and dreams and old wounds. Savel did not twitch. He breathed, and he was still. And the stillness was so total that twice she had to lower her hand very slowly toward his shoulder to check that he was warm. He was. He was the warmth of a banked forge, the kind of heat that does not leap, but does not let the room cool either. The second thing she learned was that the council was terrified of her. They tried to hide it. Lord Tyrion tried by being rude. He sent a runner for water and ordered the runner to set the cup at Wen's elbow rather than hand it to her, as the touching her wrist might transfer some contagion of luck. Lady Meredith tried by being kind. She leaned across the table and made her mouth round and slow and said, "Child, are you comfortable? You must tell us if you are not comfortable." And Wen, who had been reading those mouths since she was 4 years old, understood that the question was not about her comfort, but about whether she could be persuaded to keep doing this. Celine did not try to hide it. Celine simply watched Savel's face, and her own face was unreadable. And once, when Wen looked up, Celine met her eyes and held them for the space of 3 breaths, and then nodded once. The small, precise nod of a woman who has reached a decision she does not enjoy. 2 hours passed. The lamps were trimmed, the maps were rolled. The council did not adjourn, because to adjourn would have required the regent's voice, and the regent was asleep with his head on a glass grinder's lap. So they sat. Jackson stood. The clerk picked up his stylus eventually and pretended to take notes. The world outside the window went from afternoon gray to early evening gray, and the lamps grew brighter against the dimming. And at last Savel drew a breath that was different from the other breaths, deeper at the start and slower at the end, and opened his eyes. He did not move at first. He lay there a heartbeat longer than he needed to, and Wen, who could not hear what he was thinking, could see what he was thinking, because his eyes were open against her skirt, and they were looking at nothing, the way a man's eyes look at nothing when he has just realized where he is and is calculating the cost of being there. Then he sat up. He did it in one motion, without bracing his hand on her leg, without using her body to push from, which was a courtesy she did not expect, and which made her chest hurt for a reason she could not name. He looked at the council. The council looked at the table. He looked at Jackson. Jackson's face did not change, but his shoulders came down by a finger's width. He looked at Wen. His eyes were gray with a paler ring at the rim, and they were tired in a way that eyes should not be allowed to be tired. And he held her gaze for 1 second, and then a second more, and she understood, with the same wordless clarity with which she had understood he was going to fall, that he had not expected to wake up at all. He said very quietly to the room, "Leave us." The room left. Celine was last. She paused at the door and looked back and said something Wen could not catch because Celine's mouth was angled away. But Savel shook his head once, and Celine closed the door behind her. He turned in his chair to face Wen fully. He folded his hands on the table, which she would later learn was something he did when he wanted to keep them from doing other things. He did not speak for a moment. Then he raised his hands and signed to her, slowly and correctly, the proper Grinders Guild hand speech of the slag districts, which no man of the keep had any business knowing. How long? Wen swallowed. 2 hours, she signed back. A little more. He closed his eyes. She watched him close them, and she watched the small shudder that went through his shoulders, and she understood that the shudder was not weakness, but the opposite of weakness, the giving way of a thing that had been held without rest for far too long. When he opened his eyes again, he signed, "What is your name?" "Wen," she signed. "Wen of the Slag." "Savel," he signed back, which she already knew. And then, after a pause in which his hands hung in the air as though they had forgotten the next word, he signed, "I am sorry." She did not know what he was sorry for. She found, later, that he had not known either, only that an apology was owed, and that he would rather pay it now, before he learned the full shape of what he owed her. He stood. He was taller than he had looked in the chair. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, and looked out at the spire, which, from this room, was visible as a thin, dark line against the bruised western sky. Wen could not hear what he said next, because he said it with his face turned away. But she saw his shoulders, and the shoulders said, "This cannot continue." And then, a breath later, "This must continue." And she understood that the two thoughts were not in conflict in him, because both of them were true. He turned back. He signed, "Will you come tomorrow?" She thought of the workshop. She thought of her brother-in-law, who was not really her brother-in-law, who took half her wages for the privilege of letting her sleep on the floor of his shop, because her own family was 12 years in the ground. She thought of the petrol in its basket, the half-grown storm bird with the wing that had set wrong, which she had carried up to the keep that morning in a covered cage, because she could not leave it alone on the storm day, and which was currently being kept by a kitchen girl who had been told it was a gift for the regent and had not known what to do with that information. She signed, "Yes." He signed, "Thank you," and the word in hand speech was the formal one, the one a lord signed to a lord, not the casual thank you of the workshops, and Wen felt her face heat and did not know where to put her eyes. She was given a room that night. It was a small room on the 3rd floor of the inner keep, with a narrow bed and a window that did not open, and a basin of warm water that someone had set out without knocking. The petrol was brought to her in its cage by a kitchen girl who did not meet her eyes. The petrol was furious. It had been furious all day. It hissed at her through the bars in the small, dry, papery hiss of its kind, and Wen opened the cage and let it out onto her wrist, and let it bite her thumb in the way that meant, "I has been alone and you owe me." And she sat on the edge of the bed and let it sulk against her collarbone, and she thought, "What have I done?" The next day she was brought to his desk. It was framed, as the Lady Celine had explained to her in careful written notes that morning, as a matter of medical observation. The regent had not slept in over a year. The regent had slept yesterday. The variable, said Celine's tidy hand on the page, appeared to be one's proximity. Until they understood why, it would be necessary for one to remain within that proximity for portions of each day. She would be compensated, she would be housed, she would not, the note added with a precision that one recognized as a warning, be required to provide any service of an intimate nature. The regent had been explicit on that point. One had read the note twice, and then folded it small and put it in her sleeve, because she did not know what else to do with words like that. His study was a long room with tall windows and too many books, and a desk that had not been cleared in months. He sat at the desk. She sat at a smaller table by the window, with her tools and a tray of lens blanks, because he had told Celine that if the girl was going to be kept in his rooms, she would be kept usefully, and Wen had been almost pathetically grateful for the dignity of the work. She ground, he read. The petrel sat in its basket at her feet, and every so often it would put its head out and look at him across the room, with the flat, black, appraising eye of a creature that is decided to be unimpressed with the world. He did not fall asleep at the desk. He had been very clear, through Celine, that he would not. He intended only to work in her presence and to see whether the proximity was sufficient on its own, without contact, to take the edge off. He worked for 3 hours. She watched him out of the corner of her eye. She watched the moment, around the 2nd hour, when his head began to dip, and the moment after that, when he caught himself and sat up sharply, and the moment after that, when his jaw set and he did not let it happen again. He did not sleep. But by the end of the 3rd hour, the small permanent tremor in his left hand, which he had noticed at the council and had assumed was a nerve injury, had stopped. He noticed her noticing. He looked at his own hand on the desk as though it belonged to someone else. Then he looked at her. He did not sign. He simply held her gaze for a moment, and she felt, in the back of her throat, a thing she did not have a word for. That half-second of stillness, right before her ears would have rung, if her ears could still ring. The place where a sound would have been and was not. She looked away first. She picked up the lens blank and put it down again. The petrel, at her feet, made a small, grumbling sound and did not bite anyone. He cleared his throat. He signed TheBird. She signed, "Her name is Pin." "Why Pin?" "Because she pins my sleeve when she is angry. She is angry often." He almost smiled. She saw the almost. It did not become a smile, but it changed the shape of his mouth for a half-second, and the half-second was enough that she had to look at her blank again to keep her face from doing anything foolish. He signed, "May I?" She did not know what he meant at first. Then she understood that he was asking permission to approach the basket, and the asking itself was so strange in a man who could have walked anywhere in the keep that she nodded without thinking. He came across the room slowly. He knelt by the basket. He did not reach in. He held one hand near the open lip of the basket, palm up, the way one offers a hand to a strange dog. And he waited. Pin considered him. Pin had not let anyone but Wen touch her in the 4 months since Wen had pulled her out of a gutter with her wing dragging. Pin hissed at Celine. Pin had bitten the kitchen girl twice. Pin looked at Savelle for a long moment, and then she stepped out of the basket onto his offered hand as though she had been waiting for it. He did not move. He was very still, the way he had been still in his sleep, and Pin walked up his wrist and sat on the inside of his elbow and tucked her bad wing against his sleeve and closed her eyes. Wen watched him watch TheBird. She watched his face do something she could not name. She watched his other hand, the one not holding the petrol, come up very slowly and hover over the small gray curve of the wing, and then withdraw without touching, as though he had remembered something about himself in time. He looked at Wen. His mouth was open a little. He signed, with the petrol still asleep on his arm. She is not afraid. Wen signed, she has never been afraid of weather. She cannot fly in it. She does not know to fear it. He looked at the bird again. He said something then, aloud, that Wen could not see because his face was turned down, and she did not ask him to repeat it. She would learn later, weeks later, that what he had said was, "Neither has she," and that he had not meant the bird. He sat on the floor by the basket for a long time. He did not put the bird back. Eventually, Pin woke up and bit him, hard, on the soft place between thumb and forefinger, and he laughed, a single, short, surprised sound, and Wen saw the laugh and felt something in her chest do a thing she did not have permission to feel. The arrangement escalated by rungs, the way Celine had said it would, each rung described in cold administrative language so that no one in the keep would have to call it what it was. The desk was not enough. The third afternoon, Savelle stood up from his chair after 4 hours of working in her presence and walked 3 steps and put his hand flat against the wall and did not move. Wen watched his shoulders. Jackson, who had been standing in the doorway because Jackson was always standing in some doorway now, came in and took Savelle under the arm without speaking and walked him to the long couch under the window and laid him down on it the way a man lays down a brother, and Savelle did not resist because he could not. He had run out of resistance. He looked at Wen with eyes that were already half closed and signed, one-handed and clumsy, "May I?" And Wen got up from her work table and went to the couch and sat at the end of it, and he put his head on her knee for the second time in his life, and he was asleep before she had finished arranging her skirt. She sat very still. The petrol hopped out of her basket and walked the length of the couch and settled on his chest, on the slow rise and fall of his ribs, and tucked her bad wing under her good one, and slept too. Jackson stood in the doorway and watched them. After a while, he came in and pulled a chair to the window and sat in it with his sword across his knees. He did not look at Wen, which was a kindness. He looked at the spire. When Savelle woke that time, 3 hours later, he did not sit up at once. He lay with his eyes open, looking at the underside of Pin's wing where it covered his collarbone, and he breathed, and Wen watched the small muscle at the corner of his jaw, which had been clenched for as long as she had known him, ease for the first time. He turned his head a fraction. He looked up at her. He did not speak, and he did not sign. He simply looked at her, and his eyes were gray and tired and not afraid of her, and she understood, with the same dumb animal clarity, that he had made a decision while she was not watching, and that the decision was not in her favor, and not in his, and not in anyone's, but that it had been made. The desk became the couch. The couch was not enough either after another week. The healers, who had been brought in one by one and sworn to a silence so total that 2 of them had wept, said what Celine had already concluded, which was that contact and duration both mattered, and that the only thing left to try was the night. The first night in his chambers, Wen slept on a pallet in the outer room. Saville slept, badly, on his own bed with the door open between them. He woke 7 times. She knew because Jackson told her in the morning, his face carefully neutral, as though he were reporting on weather. The second night, the pallet was moved into his room. He slept 4 times broken. The third night, The pallet was set at the foot of the bed. He slept twice broken. The fourth night, the pallet was put away. Celine wrote her another note. The note was longer this time, and the careful language was thinner. And at the bottom of the note, Celine had added in her own hand, "This is not what you came here for, and you may refuse. And if you refuse, no one in this keep will ever ask you again, and you will be paid and sent home with a pension that will keep your old age soft." Wen read it twice. She folded it. She put it in her sleeve with the first note. She went to the door of his chambers and she knocked, and when Jackson opened it, she said, in her thin, unused voice, that she did not like the sound of, and that he did not flinch from, "I will stay." Savelle was at the window. He turned when Jackson brought her in. He looked at her for a long time. He signed, "You do not have to." She signed, "I know." He signed, "Why?" She thought about it. She thought about the petrol asleep on his chest. She thought about the small unclenching of the muscle in his jaw. She thought about her mother, 12 years gone, and the strike that had taken her hearing and her mother both, and the long, quiet years after, in which she had learned to read mouths because there was nothing else to read, and she thought, I have spent my whole life looking at faces, and I have never seen one like his, that is so tired and still trying to be kind. She did not sign any of that. She signed, "Because the bird likes you." He laughed. It was the second time she had seen him laugh. It was a worse laugh than the first, because there was something in it that was breaking, but it was still a laugh, and she would take it. That night she lay on the far side of his bed, on top of the coverlet, fully dressed, with 3 handspans of mattress between them, and she put one hand flat on the coverlet between their bodies, and after a long time she felt him put one hand flat on the coverlet too, not touching hers, only near it. He slept. He slept for 9 hours. The petrel slept on the pillow above his head, with her bad wing draped across his hair. In the morning, when Wen woke, Savelle was already awake and looking at the ceiling, and his face had the expression of a man who has been given a thing he did not ask for and does not know how to put down. He turned his head on the pillow. He signed, against the linen, "Thank you." She signed back, "You are welcome." He signed, "This is not fair to you." She signed, "No." He signed, "I will find another way." She signed, "You have been looking for 14 months." He closed his eyes. The petrel, sensing the air change, opened one eye and considered him and closed it again. He did not find another way. She had been in his bed for 11 nights when she first asked him on the 12th morning, why? She had thought about how to ask. She had decided in the end to ask plainly. She made tea on the small brazier in the outer room because she did not trust the kitchen girl with his cup, and she brought it to him at his desk, and she set it down, and she sat in the chair opposite, and she signed, "Why does the storm want you?" He did not pretend not to understand. He looked at the tea. He picked it up. He drank half of it. He set it down. He signed, with his eyes on the cup and not on her. "Because I told it to." She did not understand at first. She thought she had misread the sign. She asked him to repeat it. He repeated it. She still did not understand. She made him spell it, letter by letter, with the slow workshop alphabet, and he did. And then she understood. And she sat back in the chair so hard that the chair creaked. He told her then. He told her without looking at her, in the slow, patient hand speech of the slag districts, with his cup of cooling tea between his palms. He told her about the night the great storm had come, 14 months ago. He told her that he had stood on the spire and held it off the Capitol, and that doing so had bent the wind, and the bending of the wind had pushed the storm south and east into the floodplain into the low border district of Erlin, where 6 villages had drowned in a single hour because the rivers had risen faster than any horn could warn. He told her the count. He told her the names of the villages, all 6, in order, because he had learned them. He told her that he could have let the storm break over the capital instead, that the capital was stone and high ground, and would have lost lives but not 6 villages of lives, and that he had chosen, in the half-second he had to choose, the capital, because the capital was what he had been raised to keep. He told her that he had been right by every measure the council kept, and that he had been wrong by every measure that mattered to him, and that he had not known until afterward that those were 2 different things. He told her that the storm had come for him the next night, and every night since, and that he had understood, the first night, what it was doing. It was not a curse. It was not a relic. It was not a poison. It was a verdict. The sky had named a cost, and he agreed with the naming, and so the sky was carrying it out, slowly, in the only way the sky knew how, by never letting him close his eyes again. He had not fought it, he signed, because he did not believe he should fight it. He had stood on the spire every night not to save the capital, though it had also saved the capital, but because he had thought, if I am going to be killed by the sky, let me be useful to it while it kills me. He stopped signing. He drank the rest of the tea. He set the cup down. Wen looked at him. She looked at his hands, which were broad and scarred at the knuckles and steady on the cup. She looked at his face, which was the face of a man who had been telling himself this story for over a year and had stopped hearing how it sounded. She signed, and me. He signed, I do not know. She signed, you know. He signed, after a long pause, you are not afraid of it, of the sky. It cannot find a way in through you. When you are near me, it cannot reach me through you, and I... He stopped. He started again. And I cannot reach it through you either. I cannot offer myself to it through you. You are in the way. She signed, good. He signed, when. She signed, no, do not. I am in the way. I will stay in the way. He looked at her. She had never seen his face do what it did then. It was not a smile. It was not a frown. It was the look of a man who has been carrying a verdict against himself for so long that he has forgotten verdicts can be appealed, and who was now, against his will, hearing an appeal. He signed, you do not understand. I let them drown. She signed, I know. He signed, 6 villages. She signed, I heard you the first time. He almost laughed. He did not. He signed, you cannot tell me it does not matter. She signed, I am not telling you that. I am telling you that you are not the one who gets to sentence yourself. I am telling you that the storm is not a court. I am telling you that you have been agreeing with a thing that is killing you and calling it justice, and that I will not let you keep agreeing with it while you sleep against me. He stared at her. She signed, do you understand? He signed, you are very angry. She signed, yes. He signed, at me. She signed, at you, yes, and at the storm, and at every advisor in this keep who has let you do this, and at myself for not understanding it sooner, but mostly at you. You do not get to decide alone. You do not get to be the only voice in the trial. You have stacked the bench. He laughed then, properly, a short bark of a laugh, and he covered his face with his hand, and his shoulders shook once, and Wen could not tell if he was laughing or weeping, and she did not ask. She got up. She went around the desk. She stood beside his chair. She put her hand on the back of his neck, the first time she had touched him deliberately, and she felt under her palm the small, hot tension of a man holding himself together by an act of will. And she felt, against the inside of her wrist, the half-second of stillness right before her ears would have rung, the bond signature that she did not yet have a name for, and that he had been feeling for 2 weeks and not naming either. He did not lean into her hand. He did not lean away. He sat with her palm on the back of his neck and breathed, and after a while, the tension under her palm eased. Not all of it, not most of it, but some, the way the tremor in his hand had eased on the first day at the desk. She signed, one-handed, badly, against his collarbone. "We are going to fight about this." He signed back, also one-handed, into the air above the desk. "I am aware." That night, he could not sleep at all. He had told her the truth, and the telling had done something to the arrangement that neither of them had words for. And he lay on his back in the dark, with his eyes open and his jaw clenched, and his hands fisted at his sides. And Wen lay beside him, with her hand near his on the coverlet, but not touching, because she had understood, by now, that he needed to be the one to close the distance, that any closing she did would feel to him like one more thing taken from him without his consent. She lay awake. She watched the small shapes the moon made on the ceiling through the high window. She listened, in the wordless way she listened, to the rhythm of his breathing, which was wrong. Around the hour when the keep bell would have rung third watch, the storm came. She felt it first as a change in the air pressure against her cheek. The hairs at the back of her neck lifted. The petrel, on the pillow above Savel's head, woke and made the small, low warning sound she made when weather was coming. And Savel's eyes, which had been open, closed. Wen sat up. He did not move. His hands were still fisted at his sides. His breath had stopped being the breath of a man trying to sleep and had become the breath of a man trying not to. She watched his face. She watched the small tightening at the corners of his eyes that meant he was listening to something inside his own skull. And she understood, with the cold clarity that she had been carrying all day since he had told her, that he was listening to the verdict, and that he was about to agree with it again, the way he had agreed with it every night for 14 months, the way he had agreed with it before she had ever come up from the slag. She put her hand on his chest. She did it without thinking. She put her whole palm flat on his sternum, over the linen of his shirt, and she felt his heart under her hand, beating too fast and too hard. And she leaned down close to his ear, which was useless because he was not the one who could not hear. And she signed instead, against the side of his face, where he would feel her hands move in the dark. No. He opened his eyes. She signed against his cheek. No, you do not go. You do not get to go tonight. You do not get to agree with it tonight. I am here. I am in the way. His mouth moved. She could not see it in the dark, but she felt the shape of it against the back of her wrist. He was saying her name. He was saying her name like a man drowning says the name of a shore. She signed, "You said it yourself. The storm cannot reach you through me, so it does not reach you. Tonight, it does not reach you. Tonight, you stay." The room was full of the smell of the air before lightning, the coin under the tongue, the metal taste at the back of the throat. Pin was hissing, low and continuous, the small dry sound of a bird who has decided to be braver than she has any business being. Outside, beyond the high window, the sky was the color of a bruise that had been struck again. Savel made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when he has been holding a stone up for 14 months and his arms are shaking. Wen put her other hand on the side of his face. She held his face between her hands. She made him look at her in the moonlight, and she signed, with one hand against his cheek, so that he would feel the motion even in the dark. 6 villages drowned. You did not kill them. The storm killed them. You chose between 2 terrible things, and you chose the one you had been trained to choose, and you have been paying for it every night for a year. And the people in those villages have not been served by your dying. No one has been served by your dying. I am not served by your dying. The bird is not served. The capital is not served. The storm is not a judge. It is weather. Do you hear me? It is weather. He shook his head against her palms once, slowly. She signed, yes. He shook his head again. She signed, yes. You do not get to keep agreeing. I take it back for you. I take the agreement back. The verdict is appealed. I appeal it. Do you hear me? I appeal it. He made the sound again. It was closer to a word this time. It was almost her name. She did not let him go. She put her forehead against his forehead. She kept her hands on his face. She felt under her palms the moment when something in him, some long-held line, gave. It was not a snap. It was not a click. It was the slow, grudging unbraiding of a rope that had been pulled tight for too long, fiber by fiber, in the dark, against her hands. The pressure in the room began to ease. She felt it before she saw it. The hair on her arms lay down. The taste at the back of her throat softened. Pin stopped hissing and made instead the small interrogative chirp that meant, "Are we safe now?" And Wen could not answer her, because Wen was crying, silently, the way she cried, and she had not noticed she was crying until the wet ran down onto the back of her own wrist. Savell breathed in. He breathed out. He breathed in again. His hands, which had been fisted at his sides, unfisted. One of them came up, slowly, and covered the hand she had on his cheek. He held her hand against his own face. He did not let her pull it away. He signed, one-handed, against the back of her wrist. Stay. She signed back with her free hand against his cheek. I am here. He signed, no. Stay. Not only tonight. Stay. She signed, I am here. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep at first. He lay with her hand on his face and his hand over her hand, and the petrel walked down from the pillow and lay along the line of his throat, with her bad wing across his collarbone. And after a long time, in the slow gray before dawn, Savell's breath lengthened, and he slept. And he did not wake again until the sun was full on the wall. And Wen lay awake the whole time, with her hand on his face, and watched him do it. The keep did not know what had happened that night. The keep would never quite know. Celine, who had been awake at her own window, because Celine had developed a habit of being awake at her own window on storm nights, watched the sky settle without the spire lighting. And she sat for a long time with her hand on the sill. And then she went to her desk and wrote 3 letters that she did not send. And then she went to bed. Jackson, who had been at the door of the chambers, heard nothing, because there had been nothing to hear. And that in itself was so strange that he had stood there until dawn just to be sure of it. It did not end that night. It did not end cleanly. The storm came again 2 nights later, and Wen held his face between her hands again. And the night after that, and the night after that. By the end of the 2nd week, she did not have to hold his face. She only had to put her hand on his chest. By the end of the 3rd week, she only had to be in the bed. By the end of the 2nd month, he slept on his own, most nights, and she slept beside him, because by then they were sleeping beside each other for reasons that had nothing to do with verdicts and storms. And the arrangement that Celine had drawn up in cold administrative language was no longer the shape of the thing between them, and no one in the keep, including Celine, pretended otherwise. He did not stop standing on the spire. The capital still needed a stormbinder, and he was still the only one. But he stood on it now as a man doing a job, not as a man waiting to be executed. And that, Wen told him once, was the only difference she cared about. He told her, in return, on a morning that was not particularly special, that he had written down the names of the 6 villages and the count of the dead, and that he was going to spend the rest of his life finding the descendants and the survivors, and seeing that the surviving ones were not poor, and that the descendants knew the names. He told her this not as a penance, but as a plain thing he intended to do, and she nodded, and she signed, good, and she did not say anything else, because there was nothing else to say. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the second storm, when the thing happened that she would remember. She was at her work table in his study. She was grinding a small replacement lens for the lower observatory, because Celine had quietly arranged for her to be paid as a guildmaster now, and Wen had not refused the title, because the title meant her name would be in a book somewhere, and she had wanted, since she was a child, to be in a book. Savo was at his desk. He was writing a letter. The letter was to the head man of the 3rd of the 6 villages, the one whose survivors had been hardest to find. He had been writing it for 3 days. He was not a fast writer when the writing mattered. Pin was on the windowsill in a patch of sun. Her bad wing was open, the way she opened it when she was warm and content, and she was making the small, contented clicking sound that she made when she had eaten well and did not feel the need to bite anyone for a while. The light through the window was the ordinary slant of late afternoon. There was no storm. There was no weather. The spire, outside, was a dark line against a clear sky, and it had been a dark line against a clear sky for 11 days. Savel finished his letter. He set the pen down. He pushed the letter to the corner of the desk for Jackson to take down in the morning. He looked across the room at Wen, who was bent over her lens with her hair falling forward, and he watched her for a long moment. Then he got up. He came across the room. He stood beside her work table. He waited until she looked up. He did not sign. He did not speak. He simply held out his hand, palm up, the way he had once held out his hand to the petrel, asking, and not assuming. She looked at his hand. She set the lens down. She wiped her fingers on her apron. She put her hand in his. He bent. He kissed the back of her hand, once, the small, chaste, courtly kiss of a man who had been raised in a keep, and then he turned her hand over and kissed the inside of her wrist, where her pulse was, less chastely, with his mouth open against her skin, and she felt for the 3rd and final time the half-second of stillness right before her ears would have rung, the place where a sound was not. The small, soft signature of a thing that had not snapped into place, but had grown, rung by rung, through every escalation of the cold administrative ladder, until it was no longer administrative at all. He let her hand go. He did not say anything. He went back to his desk. He sat down. He picked up another pen and started another letter. Pin, on the windowsill, opened her bad wing wider in the sun and made a small, satisfied sound. And Wen, at her work table, with her wrists still warm where his mouth had been, picked up her lens again and went back to grinding. And that was the moment, that ordinary Tuesday afternoon, with the dust in the air and the bird in the sun and the letter being written, that she would remember when she was old, and not any of the rest of it. There were a few moments in this one that stayed with me. The half-second of quiet, when his head first came to rest on her lap, and 15 powerful men forgot how to breathe. The small grey wing folding across his throat in the dark. and her hand on his chest, the night she appealed the verdict. I'd love to know which one landed for you. See you in the next story.